Hi there guys, welcome back, and hello if you are new, and welcome to the final video of 2024 from me. So as you guys all know, I released my first sort of 30 until 16 part of the album of the years, and this week I'm going to be going through 15 to the coveted album of the year. In all honesty, I think all of these records that I've mentioned are great for very different reasons. A couple of you mentioned that I included, stuff that wasn't metal. And I did that on purpose because, I was kind of like, these are my records, they're the records that I've chosen. And I think it kind of speaks to my taste in general. As, I'm getting a bit older and kind of things are changing a little bit. So yeah, without further ado, we jump back into my albums of the year at number 15 with High Vis and Guided Tour. So this is a complete newcomer of a band. I've never even heard of this band before, but my colleague Leah was going on and on and on about them, and she put them on in the office, and I've been hooked ever since. In terms of a sound, they kind of sound a little bit like a Scouse U2 meets the Stone Roses with a bit of hardcore adjacent in there as well. For me, it's just been one of those records that I've just kind of really enjoyed. The more I've listened to it, the more I've kind of gleaned these different aspects from it. And it's just kind of a nice, chill record, to be fair. It's one of those ones where I put on at the end of the day. That was quite unexpected. I did not expect to have High Vis in here. So patience can very much be a virtue, and in the world of Unto Others, that definitely rings true. Never Neverland wasn't necessarily an album that I think was easy for the band to kind of put together. There was a lot of trials and tribulations that sort of surrounded it. But, I think the great thing about this record is it explores the sort of vignettes and stories of Unto Others and kind of has that sort of tongue-in-cheek aspect of them, like Mama Likes the Door Closed, which is sort of I think like a homage to 70s, 80s horror. But then you've got kind of tracks which are a little bit more philosophical, a little bit more kind of down to earth, and have a bit more of a message with them as well. And really this album kind of delves into their gothic aspect of the band's sound more than ever before. And they are kind of, exploring different ideas, which is one of the things I really liked about this record as well. But for me, it's just the tightening up of the songwriting. And not to mention, that they're great friends of mine, lovely guys, and deserve all the praise, I think. So Pallbearer have always been a emotionally dense band, I think. But with Mind Burns Alive, really, I think this is probably the most sort of musically honest, maybe, and musically vulnerable the band have been. So I know that The Forgotten Days was about the passing of Joe's mother, and also the idea of dementia and things like that. And Mind Burns Alive is kind of similar to that, but it kind of explores the human condition, things to do with isolation, loneliness. But I also think there's a bit more of a prog rock sensibility on here. Since Heartless, that's been sort of being toyed with a little bit. But for me, the incorporation of saxophone and stuff really kind of pushed this album. The great thing about this album is the lyrics, they're so brutal, but also incredibly poetic at the same time. I think it kind of, dances from this paranoia of isolation, anxiety, and all these different ideas that people do feel. And I think is incredibly relatable as a record. And not to mention, the songs are just fantastic. I think they're some of the best Pallbearer have written to date. So that's why it's in here. After the David Attenborough fest that was Human Nature, Endless Forms Most Beautiful, Yesterwind kind of looks at more of a philosophical look on the human race, and it looks at the idea of ancestry, time, and some of the sort of bigger, loftier philosophical questions. Floor Janssen's performance on here is absolutely incredible. You could say it's flawless. But no, for real, her operatic section on The Weave, I think, is one of my favourite vocal sort of moments of this year. It's so powerful, and I think it kind of taps into that love of musicals and soundtracks and things like that I have, which is why this has kind of ended up sort of wiggling its way in. I didn't realise how much I'd listened to it and how much I really love it. Yeah, this album is a lot heavier. It kind of returns to Nightwish's formative years, I think, you know, in terms of like Once and things like that. It's a really, really great record, and one that I haven't been able to get enough of.
With the road in view, you see clear enough. I don't know if that...
So after the meditations on grief and its processing that were stage 4 and lament, Touche Amore came back with Spiral in a Straight Line. And for me, this record is kind of like an audio version of when someone asks you, is everything okay? And you just say, yeah, I'm fine, when everything is not fine. It's kind of that keeping up appearances. It was recorded over, I think, the rainiest period in LA, like on record, basically. And I think that really has seeped through that sort of greyness, the emotional state of things, and just how difficult certain things can be. I would say it's probably one of my most listened to records of the year. And I think that's what I've always really loved about Touche, is they're so emotionally honest. You know, Jeremy Bolm's performance on here is amazing. Ross Robinson came back as well. It's a perfect team, and definitely one of the reasons it's in my albums of the year. So when it comes to misery, there are none more miserable than The Cure. And after teasing Songs of a Lost World for what seems like absolutely years, or it is actually absolutely years, we finally got it. I remember seeing them, I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, and they played for like 3.5 hours, and they played a couple of songs off of this record. And it's just absolutely brilliant. You know, for me, I think it's a record that is enormously bleak, but kind of speaks to the integrity of The Cure. You know, the fact that they released a single which had like 3 minutes and 40 seconds until the vocals came in. Also, it shows just how influential they are, particularly a lot of the bands on this list, you know, probably wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for The Cure. Robert Smith is brilliant with lyrics, and you know, some of the moments that are on here really do kind of speak to that, and I think it's a beautiful but very heartfelt message, you know, to love and being alone, and you know, kind of sort of just trying to muddle your way through life, really. You know, it's not really been out for all that long, but for the amount of time that it's been out, I've been listening to it a hell of a lot, and it's, you know, perfect for this winter kind of season, and I think, you know, it really is such an honest record. So yeah, definitely a night of, is it misery and despair?
Welcome to a night full of music and despair.
No, I don't know.
What kind of fucking
that.
tagline is that?
So 200 Stab Wounds and Manual Manic Procedures has been my go-to album of the year. Whenever I've not known what to listen to, I've just been like, boom, let's whack this on. It's a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant record. In terms of sound, it's kind of like a cross between Pantera meets hardcore, and then death metal. They're a fantastically young band that I think are really going to push things forward for the scene. There's a great little cameo with Jamie Morgan from Code Orange on here. And I think that's the thing, is, you know, this album kind of obviously is death metal as it comes, but it kind of has the energy of a hardcore band, which is what I really loved. It's really kind of atmospheric. It has those sort of 80s sort of passages and stuff like that. And it makes you feel like you are trapped in like a psychopath's dungeon. I mean, it wouldn't be too far off their dungeon, to be fair. Definitely has its own thing to say too. Very, very big highlight in terms of death metal this year. So with More Insane, I think Undeath have without a doubt written their best album yet. Everything has tightened up about this band. I think Alex Jones's performance, you know, vocally is easily the best he's had. I think the combination of working with Mark Lewis has been great. It's made the sound kind of bigger than before, where I think it was a little bit thin. and really I think is going to push them into the sort of arenas of playing around with potentially moving to, I think, Black Dahlia murder status, you know, I think if they keep this sort of trajectory going, and obviously that, you know, they're absolutely lovely guys. I've interviewed them a couple of times, and you know, I just wish the best for them, because this record is absolutely brilliant. The dynamics are tightened up. There's more aggression. There's more melody. It's just more. Literally, it's a perfect title for the record, because I feel like this is, you know, their third full length where they've really kind of honed in on exactly what it is that I think makes Undeath. And I'm very excited to see more from this band. So after the melting instrumentation of Mesterin Kunsi, we have been revisited by the crazy Oranti Pazuzu for a more David Lynchian approach and the monochromatic Muntautuya. I think this record for me initially was kind of a bit of a taken back. There's a lot more noise elements, I think, that have been incorporated in here, but with that sort of harshness, that bleakness, comes another kind of level of beauty, really. And I think, you know, in terms of black metal, there's not many other bands that are as avant-garde as these guys. They really kind of push the boat out. There are some beautifully cinematic moments on here. You know, sometimes it sounds like a horror movie, then it sounds psychedelic. It just kind of throws you down this cosmic hallway of absolute nightmares, and it's without a doubt one of the best records I've heard this year.
Something tethered me to.
So released in the dark depths of February, this is a record that has kind of followed me around all year. She Reaches Out to She Reaches Out to She is equally as haunting as it is catchy and memorable. And I think that off the back of Birth of Violence, you know, Chelsea Wolfe very much kind of came back into the world of sort of industrial. There's moments of trip hop in here. There's beautiful sort of like jazz flurries that come through. And I think really sort of incorporates a lot of different influences, but in a wholly Chelsea Wolfe vibe. And I also think this kind of, there's a real sort of sense of stillness on this record as well, which reminded me of, you know, one of the tracks is called Liminal, but like the liminal sort of spaces that we exist in, and that sort of, that time of like, is it 3:33, you know, the sort of witching hour where no one's around and everything's super quiet and all that sort of stuff. So I did find that really, really interesting. But the most important thing is that I think that this record is just so interesting, and you can have so many different layers to it as it kind of goes on. And I think she's moving forward, but, you know, retaining all of her integrity and just adding even more strings to her bow.
You are the dream, you are the nightmare.
So for those who might be familiar with Tribulation, you'll know that they have a fascination for goth rock and all that sort of stuff. As much as they started out as a death metal band, moved into more black metal, on Sub Rosa in Aeternum, they really kind of show their heart on their sleeve in terms of what they love in the goth world. And finally, Johannes is singing, and I think he does an amazing job. You know, it must have been quite nerve-wracking doing this, because it's a totally different style for him. You know, the baritone style singing, I think, suits him really well. It has that Nick Cave-iness, a bit of The Cure, Sisters of Mercy, you know, the usual kind of haunts. But it still retains that signature Tribulation sound, which I think is the most important thing. And for me, that's one of the reasons that it's in my top 5, is because they're just pushing forward, and it's just so well written. There's like a real sense of the cinematic, you know, you've got these like choirs happening, these sort of sounds of like people being murdered. It's all based on Giallo. Like, it's just such a cool record, and it's a really refreshing step forward for the band, I think, you know, and they needed it, because I think, you know, they were in danger of becoming sort of too stale. Not stale, but just kind of rehashing the same sort of formula. So I'm really glad that they took that leap, and it's paid off so well. So despite it being 10 years between Sun Eater and Moon Healer, Job for a Cowboy have made this interminable wait pretty much feel like it's not even happened. Like they basically released this album and it was like symbiotic, essentially. This record picks up pretty much exactly where Sunita left off, and it comes in with a slightly darker, more ominous feel to it, I think. But there is a little bit of a slower vibe on here. It's a bit more groovy. There's more kind of, I think, feel to it in certain aspects. I think for me, it also plays with the unorthodox songwriting kind of ideas that the band have. You know, there's moments where I'm kind of like, oh, is that a chorus? Where's the chorus there? But it's just so good, man. Like, it's so great to have Job for a Cowboy back. They have been one of my favorite death metal bands for a very, very, very long time. And they are just one that just keeps improving with every single release. And for me, what makes Moon Healer so great is the atmosphere. It's such an atmospheric record that you really feel like you're in that weird purple vortex dimension thing. And it's just unbeatable. Really, really, really brilliant record. And maybe, I would say, on par with Sunita, maybe, which is like one of my favorite records of all time. So yeah, amazing record. Without a doubt, alternative music's success story of the year is Knocked Loose. The band went out on a massive US tour supporting Slipknot. They played for mainstream TV in America, and they've announced a show at Brixton, which is, you know, one of our biggest venues, before you get to sort of arenas and things like that. And also, I think they're going to be playing Outbreak as well. So, full disclosure, for a long time, I couldn't stand this band. You know, it just didn't, for whatever reason, it just didn't kind of work. And it wasn't until the Upon Loss EP, because Laura, my wife, is absolutely so into this band. We listened to it in the car loads and loads and loads, and then something just kind of clicked. So by the time You Won't Go Before You're Supposed To was coming out, I was quite excited for it. And when I listened to it for the first time, I just was absolutely just exhausted. I think that's the best way to put it. You know, on thirst, they give you like 10 seconds head start, and then boom, they're like racing straight after you. I think what's so great about this record is that Knocked Loose really stuck to their guns. They haven't compromised on anything. It's probably the heaviest record that has been released this year. And because of its 27-minute runtime, it never really overstays its welcome. The sort of atmosphere is also another reason why I really, really love this record. You know, there's a real sense of kind of this weird stillness between the madness. And I think that Brian Garris's lyrics are absolutely brilliant. They're incredibly sort of pained and really sort of sorrowful, but the way that he kind of like vomits them out is so full of aggression. And it's been on my list for a long time, ever since I heard it back in May, I think it was. It's just an absolutely fantastic record, and I think it really speaks volumes to the integrity of, you know, distorted, heavy guitar music, you know, and just kind of how impactful that can be, especially with, you know, I've seen it pop up on all sorts of different mainstream lists, which is amazing. You know, it kind of really captured the world's attention and kind of brought, and you know, what an album to do it. Like, literally, it is one of the heaviest records I've heard this year. It's absolutely brilliant. So after releasing the first morsel of new material when they announced The Last Will and Testament, Opeth, I think, literally sent the world into a frenzy because the growls were back. But for me, it wasn't, you know, it hasn't earned a place in this album of the year list because of the growls, but because it is a fusing together of all the different eras of Opeth. And that's what makes this record so, so special. You know, there's a truly beautiful storytelling aspect. The concept is really interesting. It was inspired by Succession, which I literally started watching like last week.
Who's your lawyer? Mr. fucking Magoo?
All of the songs that are on here are composed brilliantly. They have every sort of track in mind, they work in tandem with each other, but they also run the gamut of Opeth's entire career, which I think is so interesting. But the biggest thing for me, and I think something that's been, as much as I absolutely adore Opeth, the thing that's been lacking is the atmosphere. And I think the atmosphere of like Ghost Reveries, for example, is what made me fall in love with this band. And on the Last Will and Testament, that's back. For me, honestly, it really is back. That sort of haunting, spooky, kind of the cobwebby, like the sort of candle that's just been extinguished kind of atmosphere is back. They've been able to reinvent themselves. I think that's another thing is, the band have been going for 34 years and still they're able to reinvent their sound. It's utterly incredible. And as far as progressive metal albums go this year, you cannot do better than Opeth. Absolutely fantastic. Okay, now drum roll, as it's time to reveal my album of the year, which I'm sure you guys have probably already guessed. Anyway, it's Blood Incantation, Absolute Elsewhere. So when looking at my album of the year, my criteria is, does this change the band? What has, what's the history behind it been? Does it change the scene or whatever? And I think Absolute Elsewhere does all of that and even potentially more. But I'll get to that in a little bit. For me, the moment I press play on Absolute Elsewhere and you hear that, like my jaw was just on the floor the entire time. It is a perfect album. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and that this sound is what the band have been striving towards for all these years, incorporating elements of krautrock, cosmic music, new age, prog rock, death metal, like ambient, all this sort of stuff. But the way that they do it is so effortless and so quintessentially their own sound that I think that's what is so incredible about this. But the thing is that I think with Absolute Elsewhere, Blood Incantation have captured the zeitgeist of 2024, and they've broken down all barriers. They've basically said, why should any genre of music be confined to one particular genre? Like, how can you go from Tangerine Dream to Morbid Angel? But the way that they do it is it's just brilliant. And the fact that it's been featured not just on the metal spectrum of end of year lists, but in mainstream publications, like Time even featured this record. I think that's what it is when it really has an impact, not necessarily just on end of year lists or whatever, but it's like a cultural thing. People who aren't exposed to death metal are now being exposed to that because of this record, and I think that's unbelievable. That changes the landscape in so many different ways. And I think an album like this does not come along very many times. Even from the artwork, you're immediately transported into this magical, weird world of consciousness. And it also questions people, I think, to think for themselves and kind of, not just kind of endlessly doom scroll and like all that sort of shit, which I can never fucking stand. And that for me is why this is my album of the year, because it kind of has broken people out. And I'm sure a lot of people will say, this is kind of like almost like the phone-in album of the year, everyone seems to love it, blah blah blah. But there's a reason, because it just is absolutely sensational. When someone kind of comes along and writes something that is so different and so groundbreaking and emotionally resonant, that is just worth more than anything, really. So congratulations, Blood Incantation, on having my album of the year with Absolute Elsewhere. And that's it, I guess. So it's been an amazing year. I've been able to interview all sorts of different people, make new friends as well because of the channel. It really is not lost on me, everything that this channel has brought me. It's brought my career, like so many different friends from all over the world, and even becoming, friends with bands that I've idolized, that were in my fucking record collection, which is just wild. But yes, I just want to say thank you so much for all of the support and help and encouragement and all that sort of stuff. I really, really appreciate all of you guys so much. And, you know, any sharing or anything like that. Make sure you give me your albums of the year as well, because I love to go through, see who's doing what this is about. Because I missed loads of stuff. There's just so much stuff coming out now. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So thank you ever so much for, tuning in for another year. And I will be seeing you in 2025. Maybe I might do sort of like what albums I'm looking forward to in 25. If that's something you'd be interested in, let me know underneath me. And other than that, I will see you guys very, very soon. Have a wonderful Christmas and a very happy New Year. Take care, my friends.